The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. Presuming you're in the United States, it may be good night or good morning if you're in Europe or Asia. This is Brooks Carter welcoming you to another Human Development and Leadership Division webinar. A couple of ground rules how we do these. Our speaker is going to talk for about 45 minutes and leave about 15 minutes for questions and answers. If you have questions, type them into the question box. Should we come across something that needs to be dealt with right away, we will stop the presentation and deal with it. But mostly those questions will be saved up till the end of the presentation. Today's presenter is Stephanie Gaulding. Stephanie is truly amazing in what she's able to do. She's a principal consultant with the DPS group and has 20 years experience. I was very surprised. I thought she was much too young to have 20 years experience, but apparently she's not. And her talents she's been so important in the division. In fact, so important that she will, after I serve my term, she will be the next chair of the division. Stephanie has a master's degree from Johns Hopkins in biotechnology. She has a bachelor's degree from Virginia Tech. And one of the many amazing things about Stephanie is she uses LinkedIn for her business and actually gets something out of it. And so I'm very glad to be at this webinar because I haven't succeeded in doing anything productive with LinkedIn other than accept people into my network. So I'm really looking forward to her talk. So without further ado, I give you Stephanie.
Perfect, and thank you, Brooks. And I want to echo a good afternoon, good evening, or potentially good morning, depending on where you are in the world tonight. I'm happy to be doing this webinar tonight on LinkedIn. I actually got a question from another member leader in the division about using LinkedIn, and he actually suggested that maybe I should do this because a lot of people seem to have a lot of questions about how to use it, and people had accounts but maybe aren't using it. But before we kind of dive into the content, I know Brooks started with my bio, but I also like to give you guys a picture of who I am outside of work and business and ASQ. I actively mentor people. I work with several folks, both those graduating from college as well as in the industry. I've recently moved to Boston in the last 2 years, although I guess that's probably not something I can continue to say recently for much longer. I enjoy painting and working puzzles. I'm a huge hockey fan, which I think most of the membership team learns. And as Brooks indicated, I am an avid user of LinkedIn, partially for my business. But before we get started, I had a couple of quick questions. And Marilyn, if you can bring up the first poll question.
Absolutely, and here it comes.
So I wanted to find out from you guys, how many of you actually use LinkedIn?
And we've got 24, 43%, 50% voting, 64%, 71%, 80%. Wow, 86%. Okay, I'm going to close at 86% and share the results. So can you guys see the results? We've got 0% said LinkedIn, what's that? And 100% said, yep, I've got an account.
Perfect. And then there's one more question. So since everybody on the call seems to have a LinkedIn account, I'm interested to find out how often you all use LinkedIn. And I basically have three options for you to choose from. You're a devout user, basically part of your daily work. You're an occasional user. You have an account and hardly use it, and maybe you don't even remember the password.
So I've got 43% voted, 65, 70, 86%. Okay, again, I'm going to close at 86%. And we've got 62% occasional users, 23% devout users, and 15% hardly use it.
Well, perfect. And I hope that for those of you who are in the occasional use to have really never used it, I'm sure that there'll be some things that hopefully you will learn and take away from this and be able to apply. And even for the devout users, I might show you some things or some areas of LinkedIn that maybe you're not actively using. But obviously, as Brooks mentioned, we'll have the chat panel there for you to ask questions as we go along. I did want to start with a little bit of background. I've actually been using the platform since 2007. And when the platform first came out as a social media platform, it was targeted primarily as an online resume and kind of an online Rolodex, and it evolved pretty quickly into that fashion. And I would say in the last 5 or so years, we've seen LinkedIn transition from just really being an online Rolodex and an online resume portal, basically, into knowledge sharing, a place to gather information, and really to build and connect networks around the world. Currently, as you can see in the figure, there are 500 million registered members around the world, and literally they are global in terms of registrations. And I'm quite surprised in how many new connection requests and people who want to connect with me and network with me that are popping up from Asia, India, and continue to pop up from Europe. So those are definitely growing markets. I have evolved with this platform. Admittedly, I started out with it being an online resume and maybe an online Rolodex. And in the last few years, as Brooks alluded to in my introduction, I've actually moved into using this for my business and trying to stay on top of pieces in the industry. So what I want to try and cover today in about 40 minutes or so that we have is a couple of key topics: learning and sharing information. So how can you go find information? In particular, we'll talk a little bit about groups, how to find them, how to join them, how to post questions, kind of how to get the most out of the groups. Also, there's an option to follow what I call interesting people, which will be your heavy bloggers and folks who will share good, solid content. And then for some of you, you may even be interested in moving into the sharing space as well, and we'll talk a little bit about the publishing platform that exists in there, and I'll show you some of what I've done with that as well. I also wanted to talk a little bit about maintaining your profile and having it reflect your personal brand, especially if you're in a mode where you want to network. We'll talk about connecting with people, personalizing invitations, getting those success rates with connections, doing network building, and then one of the features that I talk about is kind of muting the noise, and how do you start to quiet some of the extra posts that kind of appear in your feed. We're going to spend most of our time actually in LinkedIn. You're going to kind of get a bird's eye view of my account and how I use this. And again, as Marilyn indicated, go ahead and record questions. If Brooks or Marilyn see something that's really urgent that we need to address now, we'll certainly do that. But we can also, I've got plenty of time at the end that we can turn around and answer questions. So with that, we're going to go ahead and launch into LinkedIn. And this may take a moment for my browser to fully load. Marilyn, can you guys see that?
Yes, I can see that.
Perfect. So Obviously, I'm in LinkedIn pretty regularly, I would say almost daily, although there are some periods of time where I may go a few days if I'm in a training class or at a conference and not quite as active in LinkedIn. So I log in automatically. If you're not in there very often, you go to linkedin.com and you'll actually get the login dashboard, and you'll need to log in and use your password to get in. I want to start actually with your profile. And part of the reason I start here is that your profile says a lot about you and what you're using LinkedIn for. So as Brooks mentioned, I use this for my business. As a consultant and working in the pharmaceutical space, I'm trying to let people know about what my expertise is, where I've worked, what some of my roles and responsibilities are. So I've tried to design a profile that supports that work. You know, I'm not out there seeking a job, but I'm out there trying to network and build relationships with folks. So I've actually gone in through several iterations, and that's what I'm doing is expanding my profile so you can kind of see what's there, and built a description and a summary of me that people can read and start to kind of get to know me on a professional level and give them a level of specialties. I also recently found, as you can see, that they've added something to the profile page that allows you to add what they call media. And in reality, what that really means is you can add a PDF, you can add an image, you can add short videos, things like that, that further explain. So for instance, if you're an author or you do a lot of publishing on quality topics and you have those nice PDF reprints of your articles, you can put them here so that people can relatively easily get to them. So I like to have my upcoming conferences and where I'm speaking kind of in that high level piece. And then beneath that, it goes into some additional information. It'll show my articles, so things that I have published, as well as my posts. And then
Stephanie?
Yes.
I have a question that's probably relevant to a lot of people.
Yes.
Is this a free account or is this an account you pay for? And are the features you're showing us in the free accounts?
So far, everything that I have shown you is in the basic free account. Okay. I do have what is called a LinkedIn Premium subscription, which you will see some areas, and I'll point those out, where I have some access to some statistics and some data beyond what a basic user would have. But in terms of a basic free account that doesn't cost you anything, your profile, the ability to post images and articles to it, to be able to publish, is all there and included in the free account.
Good, thank you.
That's actually a good question. Yeah, that's a good question. And again, I have my experience, and it kind of goes on from there. I realize that most people probably never make it past through about halfway through my experience section. But if you scroll all the way down, it's got my education, it's got my experience with ASQ, it's got endorsements from people I've worked with. So people you work with have the opportunity to endorse you once you're connected for certain skills. And something that I learned probably over the last couple years is that as the owner of the profile, you can actually click the little pencil and you can go in and edit these, including resequencing them. So for instance, if I want to move biotechnology up to the top, I can. So it appears near the top, as well as if you click this little X over on the left-hand side, you can actually delete skill or an endorsement. Now I'm not going to delete anything off my profile because I've worked to already do a lot of streamlining with these and keep those relatively simple and straightforward. And then beneath, there's an opportunity to use recommendations. I'm trying to get back in the habit as a consultant to actually include the recommendations and try and get client references posted there, etc. So as you can see, you can start to see and get a flavor for not only how you present yourself, but also when you go to look for someone, this is the type of information that typically you will see. There is an option in some of your security settings, even with the free accounts, to be able to restrict how much information the general public has access to versus your actual connections. And a part of the reason I start with this is that often many folks go through phases with LinkedIn, and they'll move between doing active job searches, right? So looking for a job, doing a career change, etc. And in particular, the areas of the profile that I highly recommend reworking to meet that need are the summary section. So you start to take a look at this particular wording and kind of what you're looking for. Typically, the advice I give folks that I work with is if you're looking for a certain type of position, then that's the kind of position descriptor that you want up there. It doesn't need to be a job title. I've run across some very interesting position descriptions that end up in here, especially when you're in the publishing world or the art and photography world. There's some really great headlines that people have, but looking for a job is a slightly different summary of your experience than, say, what I do, where I'm looking at networking and developing relationships. Unfortunately, I can't maintain two profiles, so I can't show you what my job hunting one used to look like. But anytime you edit it, again, you can kind of go back into that pencil mode, and it gives you an editable version that actually then turns around and allows you to really start to customize any of the information that's in here. And as an added tip, I actually do a lot of my editing offline in Word and then just copy and paste over, because it actually is a lot faster than sitting here typing and trying to make sure that you've spell and scrolling up and down in the little boxes. I prefer to do my editing in Word and then paste into the application. As I mentioned, kind of down here at the bottom, you'll have the media section that you can upload or you can link to media. So if you're a professional, some of you may even be consultants like me, you can link to websites and those types of things as well. So from there, establishing a good profile and understanding that and having that present is important, really, on building your connections and building your network. Without it, people really don't necessarily know you, especially if you're going to move into what is commonly referred to as open networking, where you're accepting invitations really from people that you don't know, but that want to get to know you, want to build a relationship with you going forward. This is really kind of that introductory. It's a little bit more than a business card, but it's not necessarily going to be as much as sitting down and having a 5 or a 15 or a 30-minute conversation with them. Now, that's a little bit about profile. Again, that's kind of the core basis. And from there, I really want to move into really talking about learning and sharing first and foremost. One of the great ways to learn information is through what LinkedIn refers to as groups. So if you actually click over here on this little work launch pad, it pops open another menu, and one of the options that you have is groups. And what it will do is actually take you to another area of LinkedIn, which again is also included in the free membership, so none of this functionality costs anything to you. It gives you an opportunity to actually look for groups. So if you click the Discover area, it will start to recommend groups initially based on your profile, and the more information and the more interactions you have with the system, it will start to tailor the recommendations. And what you'll see as I start to scroll down is you'll see groups that have a button that say Ask to Join, which basically means that they've set up a private group and they want to screen and limit their membership maybe to a certain type of industry professional, i.e. there's a lot of stuff that you'll see in mine that is pharmaceutical, life sciences related, and a lot of them are asked to join because they try and limit the population of people that are in there as to life science or pharmaceutical medical device professionals. The other type of group, and I'm going to see whether or not I've got one on my list, would actually be a public group. And the button will look a little different. It'll basically just say join instead of the Ask to Join button. So in that case, if it's a public group and it's an open invitation, your membership is immediate. Now, I found in most cases, most folks process those memberships pretty quickly. And for instance, we actually, as ASQ HD&L, I'm going to move over to My Groups, which is an area that shows you once you're a member of groups, all the groups that you're a member of. We actually have a group that we actually post information to, encourage folks to post discussions about and engage with others. We've had some new folks introduce themselves as well. So again, it's an opportunity and an area where, as a professional, whether you're new to a job and new to the industry, just out of college, been around for years, it's a place for all of us to interact, collaborate, and share knowledge. And sometimes you can get into some pretty rousing discussions as you look through pieces. I am actually going to go back. So I went back to this page, which actually talks about the groups. And when you're in this page and you're somebody like me who's been on this site for a while and you have a lot of groups, scrolling up and down the list is not always something that's really easy. So they've now added this ability at the top to start to filter. So I can actually type in quality and it sublists, and you can see that actually the ASQ group is also here, which I highly encourage you, if you're not a member of that group, to go there and join that group. They're pretty good about posting regular questions and trying to get discussion going as well. But again, it's an opportunity to meet and network with people and learn. People will share articles that they find interesting and relevant for the group. So you can read those and kind of comment on them. So again, as a quality professional, it provides you ways to interact not only with other quality professionals through ASQ groups, but also through your industry-specific groups in the other list. The other piece in terms of finding information is a little bit more complicated in terms of understanding, but it really starts to relate to people. You have what I would call your average users like me, that are in the system pretty regularly, that post and write some limited articles, but you also have people that are much more influential in terms of business or economics or politics or leadership and development. A lot of these well-published authors, etc. If you've got a favorite, you can turn around and you'll see up in the right-hand portion of your landing page, there are always a short list of recommendations kind of based on the articles that you're viewing and what you're posting and sharing. So as you can see, it's sharing some items with me and it keeps recommending that I should follow Bill Gates, but I have not chosen to do that. But it'll post a couple of them here. It will rotate them through so that you can see different recommendations, or you can click this view all recommendations list and you actually get a huge list that you can scroll through and you can look at their profiles, etc. The reason that they've added this is following these people is a means really to see what they're publishing without actually having to be a connection with them. Obviously, if you're like Richard Branson and you're the head of Virgin Enterprises, you don't necessarily accept connection requests from everybody, but this now gives even someone like me an opportunity to follow someone like Richard Branson and see his particular insights as he posts both on LinkedIn as well as on the Virgin blog. So this is important because it starts to put information into your content, into your feed on your main page automatically. So finding the right people and following the right people relevant to the information that you're looking for is important, right? So if you're looking for leadership topics, authors like John Maxwell are here, as well as Liz Weissman and others. If you're into self-help and improvement, Tony Robbins is in here. There's lots of different options. I have in my list of folks that I follow a lot of the actual senior officials in pharmaceutical organizations. So for instance, the president of Novo Nordisk or the president of GSK, those kinds of folks, just so that I can kind of keep tabs on their thoughts as they're publishing and sharing information. And you can also do that with other quality consultants and things like that. So what that'll do, as I mentioned, is it'll actually start to put that information into your actual feed, and you'll actually start to see things that'll show up, and ignore the ads that are there. Let me try and find one. Here you go. So this is actually one of the folks that I follow that actually tends to post a lot of articles around workplace dynamics and things like that. And I find her thought process a little interesting and entertaining to read. So she shared a blog that she also found interesting, so I can now see this, but I am not connected to her. I don't know her personally. I just find a lot of the information that she puts out there interesting and relevant to what I do. Again, as a person who not only works as a quality profession, but also coaches and mentors, my feed has a little bit of what I call a split personality. It's kind of half leadership related and half quality and pharmaceutical industry related. But that's me, right? So I talked about groups as a means to get to know people, to find information. I talked about following people, so those, what LinkedIn refers to as those influencers, those very prevalent folks. You can choose to follow those, and that information will come in. The other way to actually get information into your feed in a rather automatic and passive fashion is through your network and building your own network. And LinkedIn has actually made this very easy to find now. It's actually on the main bar of the homepage, and it's called My Network instead of Connections. So you actually can click on it, and you'll actually see recent invitations. And we'll talk about the plethora of recruiters that sometimes can deluge your inbox, but it'll also make suggestions on people that you may know. You can see all of your connections over here, and you can actually, if you really want to, you can import your contact information, and it will automatically find and invite people. I'm a little hesitant to do that depending on how you, and recommend doing that depending on how you maintain your own contacts list, because if you import contacts that you really didn't mean to import, it'll automatically send them an invitation, and while you can go in and retract it, you might not even know that you sent it until they accept it. But it does have some intelligence built behind it in terms of understanding people by your profile who worked at companies that you worked at, and starts to recommend and see if you know any of these folks. And if you do, you've got the opportunity to, for instance, I actually know Marcy. She actually works at a pharmaceutical company here in Boston, and I can actually turn around and click connect. Now, doing it this way is what I call a quick connection. I usually reserve this option for people that I know really well, right? I don't need an introductory note. They know who I am. They're not going to be surprised that I'm putting a connection request there. But for instance, Alba, I met her once, and is not somebody that I would use this little quick connect button because I can't personalize the invitation. Instead, if I wanted to connect with her or someone else who was in here, I could actually search for her, Alba. And it'll bring me to her profile, and I can take a look, but since I know who she is, I don't necessarily need to look at that. But then I can actually click the connect button, and it will actually give me an option to add a personalized note. Therefore, it's not sending the default standard LinkedIn, you know, I'd like to add you to my professional network email. And the reason that I like to customize notes and add that in there is that it can help prompt the person, if you've met them only once or twice, when and where you might have met them, and kind of why you're asking to pull them into your connections. Because at that point, it's kind of an agreement between you and that person that you're going to share a post, and they're going to see what you post, and you're going to see what they post, and hopefully it's relevant information. In some cases, when you move into building open networks and being open to receiving connection requests from others that are not really formally people that you've met or people that you know, the note, although character restricted, you don't have gobs and gobs of space. I think you've got maybe 500 characters. You can write a short introductory note and kind of let them know why you reached out to them and why you'd like to add them to the network. And in some cases, I've had people do this with me as I've done with others, and it allows a little bit of initial dialogue before you actually make that connection request to make sure it's a person that you want in your network. So it is something that I like to do. All you have to do here is you just click the add a note button. It'll pop up another screen. You type in your note, and actually it's 300 characters and not 500, so it's even shorter. And then you can click send, and it'll send off your personalized version of the invitation versus the generic LinkedIn version of the invitation. I like it as a personal touch. When I go to conferences and meet new people, one of the first things I do when I get home is I go back into LinkedIn and I look them up, and then I add that personal note and tell them it was nice meeting them at the conference last week and that kind of stuff. And I find for me that the connection rate is a lot higher if you go ahead and you prompt people with maybe where you met. Maybe you were at an ASQ section meeting and you met somebody new for the first time and you want to build that connection. We all have busy lives, and as I kind of talked about in the description of this, we get a lot of noise with living in our digital age. So kind of helping people hone in on where they might have seen you and where they might recognize you is a great way to make a good impression with somebody off the get-go. Now for Alba, I'm not going to do that right now, but that is that process and how to do that. And what you'll find over time is that you'll build a large network of persons, which I still sometimes use as an online Rolodex. So for instance, I've got in here a whole bunch of folks, some of which, like these folks, I have met more recently, or they heard about this webinar and started to want to connect, those types of items. Neil, I've worked with for quite some time. But I can actually go through, and if I'm looking for someone, for instance, I know a quality consultant that I usually bounce ideas off of is Mary Messler. So I can search my connections in the dedicated search box right here and type in Mary, and all of a sudden I get a short list of Marys and Mary Ann's and Mary Beth's instead of having to look through my 1,023 connections. When your network's small, scrolling through is not a big deal, but when you start to get to the network size that I have, it definitely is a bit more of a challenge to go back and find people. This message button, so for instance, if I had a specific need for Mary right now, this message button would actually pop up, and you can actually, within the application, again, all of this is included with what you're getting in your free membership that it looks like all of you have, is the capability to send somebody a brief little message within the system that when they log in to the system, they'll get the next time. And if they're a super user like I am, and these religious devout users that are also connected on their mobile devices, that message notification will also go to their mobile device, so they'll know that you sent them a message. But for people I don't interact with on a daily basis, so Mary and I interact every now and again on consulting projects, I'll pop her a message here just to get her attention or maybe her quick availability, and then we'll actually resort to phone calls or more traditional emails. But I do find it a good way to connect and chat with folks. Then looking from there, so you've got the message option. You'll also see you've got an option to remove connections. The reason I wanted to show folks that is sometimes we get long lists of connections and maybe the connections don't make sense anymore, or maybe we inadvertently accepted one we didn't mean to. You, as your account and your profile and your network, you have that capability to remove connections. And I do periodically use it. It is something that definitely is helpful.
Stephanie?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Well, since you're talking about removing people, we have a question that says, can you remove people from your network without them knowing so as not to offend?
Yeah, so when you remove somebody from your network, it's not going to send them an email notification that they've been removed. And removing them is one thing. You do actually, when you remove them, also have an option that LinkedIn puts in there for blocked folks. And in reality, I have only used that once. And it would be with a gentleman who was trying to use LinkedIn as a dating site recently. So I actually blocked and reported him because it's an inappropriate use of a professional networking site. But removing the connection, they won't get the notification. Now, if it's somebody you work with routinely and you've removed them, they may notice the next time that they look you up in the system. But if it's somebody you don't know very well, and it's like me, I've got 1,000 connections, if I fluctuate one or two over a course of a day or two, I'm not necessarily going to notice that, and I'm definitely not going to try and figure out which of the 1,000 actually removed me as a connection. To me, they saw my feeds and maybe they decided they weren't interested in the information that I was typically sharing, or the articles that I've been writing and posting. You know, it just wasn't as relevant as maybe they thought it might be. So I don't take it personally if somebody does that, and you do have the option to do that relatively anonymously. It's a good, relevant question.
Thanks, Steph.
No problem. So we talked about building your network, connecting with people, having that information available to you. I do want to go back now that we've talked about that. So if you go back to your main page, part of the reason that I actually do that and I follow influential people is that when I get in the morning and maybe at lunchtime while I'm sitting there eating my lunch, I'll scroll through my LinkedIn feed and see who's shared what articles, and have something popped up in the industry recently or today. And working in the regulated pharmaceutical industry, there's always news that's kind of coming out. As you can see, there's some information on Medicago that's just come out in terms of them meeting a major milestone. So it is a great way to kind of stay current on activities that are going on very much and very specific to what's here. Now, one of the things that can happen, because it is a social media site, and as Brooks originally asked, is it a free account? It is a free account, and even as a paid subscriber, I actually am subject to things like advertisements. LinkedIn marketing apparently wants to get me to use their marketing solutions pretty heavily. And what I can do is actually go through and hide that particular post. So this 3 dots here actually gives you the opportunity to do a couple things. On an ad, it'll just hide it. You won't see it in your feed, and it shouldn't recycle back to your feed anytime soon. Like, it's not going to pop back into your feed 2 hours later and you're going to have to hide it again. It usually takes I'd say about a week before you might even remotely see that ad again. The LinkedIn marketing ones for me pop up about once every 2 weeks in terms of being in my feed. You can also do the same thing with information that people are sharing. You can hide the post from your feed. You can actually unfollow a person directly there. So for some cases, you may want to stay connected to the person because it's your online Rolodex, and I don't carry around a paper Rolodex or rely on having all my contacts in one place. LinkedIn has become my one place for all my contacts. If I don't want to necessarily see everything that Maxwell is sharing, but I want to maintain him in my contacts list, I can unfollow him, and his posts and things that he shares won't appear in my feed anymore, but he'll remain in my connections so I can easily find him again. So it is a nuance that is there and available if you'd like to stay connected, but maybe you don't like the content that somebody's typically sharing as well. Because I know that for many of us, you can get a lot of noise. Now, I've been doing this, and being a devout user, I go through and I clean up ads and I clean up unrelevant posts pretty frequently. So I don't tend to have too much of that. Now, the ads, always some form of them will appear because it's how LinkedIn tends to keep their operation free for those 500 million users around the world. But it means I don't have to see them all the time and keep scrolling through them. The other thing that you will find is that as your connections go around and are looking at information in their feeds, they may click on their little thumbs up or like button, and that will cause it to appear in your feed. So in this case, CRB actually liked an ISPE, or an International Society for Pharmaceutical Engineering blog post. And then a friend of mine actually liked the CRB post, and therefore it appears in my feed. Well, CRB is a company, they're not a person. I happen to know them pretty well. They're another engineering firm in the industry. And you'll notice that there's this little follow option that is over here. And what this means is that CRB has established a company page, which I'll take you to in a minute. But I can choose to not only follow people, but I can choose to follow companies. So clicking it means I'm now following CRB, and anytime they share information on LinkedIn, I'll get it directly. I don't have to wait for somebody else to basically forward it to me. And if you're looking for companies, so as a means of being in the quality world, oftentimes we're looking for people with certain sets of experience or certain companies. You can actually start to search for people or organizations that are in the system. So for instance, if you want a quality consultant, right? So all I did is typed in quality consultant and I hit return. You'll get back a series of search results. And at the top here, what you'll have is you can actually sort those and list just people who have quality consultants somewhere in their profile. Jobs, well, I'm not looking for a job. I'm looking for somebody maybe to come work for me, or I'm looking for some help. More often than not, I resort to the people and the companies piece. So if I click on people, it narrows my list down to just the people values. And I can see here that I've got a quality engineering consultant, and I may want to go kind of look at her background and experience. I've got somebody I'm already connected with. You know, you can start to look through, and again, if they truly are consultants, if you go and actually click on them, hopefully they've got some information in their profile that helps you understand a little bit more about them and what their expertise is. This is a great example, personally speaking, of in the quality world, if you're a consultant, maybe not having a robust profile, because I'm not sure I know what she does. But as I was mentioning when I talked about CRB, the other thing that you can look for is actual companies. So maybe you're looking for an actual consulting firm, right? You don't want just an independent consultant, but you really want a consulting firm. By clicking on companies, you can actually find those particular groups. And for instance, we'll just click on this medical device consulting group that's relatively small. And it'll provide you a little bit of information about the company. It'll point you to their website, when they were founded. It'll give you some basic employee information so that you can kind of see. And for me, what I do is instead of using Google to find companies, I more often try and come into LinkedIn to find them, because then I'm sure if I've liked their profile and like what I see in LinkedIn, I'm getting to the right website. There's nothing worse than using Google to try and find a quality consultant and then not landing on the right type. A quality consultant in IT is not going to work in pharmaceuticals, right? So understanding how to tweak those pieces is important. And I think I have realistically covered the majority of the topics, and I want to be conscious of time. For me, those are kind of the basics. I think the only thing I didn't cover that I wanted to cover, that I'll use the last minute or two to talk about before I flip and give you a couple more additional tips that'll also be in the presentation, is really publishing. I just began to start to publish on LinkedIn and find it a great venue instead of having to invest in my own blog site, which that's, as I think about it, a whole nother headache and a whole nother website that I have to maintain. LinkedIn has actually given me a great little built-in publishing platform that, again, for a free membership or a premium membership is included. It allows you to include a photo at the top, and it allows you to write some basic text. It's not a powerhouse publishing unit by any stretch, because you do have some limitations in terms of of what you can include and how much formatting that you can really do. You can italicize and bold and underline, and you've got a couple heading levels, and you can kind of insert quotes and insert links and video media. But what I find for basic publishing needs, for basically blog posting, it makes sense. So I actually started posting this year, and as you can see, I probably have about 6 or 7 articles at this point, where I actually talk about various topics that are either on my mind, or in this case, I went to a conference and thought it was really fabulous, thought everybody should have been there, and so I wrote about it, right, and shared the information that I could in a short post. That one's actually not so short, it's pretty lengthy. But there are pieces, this is one I posted in January that talked about pharmaceuticals future, especially with the presidential transition that was going ahead. People were antsy, and people always are every time we go through this. So this is kind of my thoughts on those pieces. So if you're in that world where you've got something to share, or maybe you've got a thought, this is a great way to do this. I know Wanda has posted some things about World Conference in her feed and her experience. So it is a great way to share information out with your network as well, without having to invest in a full blog site. And with that, I could go on, as I'm sure Brooks and Marilyn could attest to, for quite some time, talking about it because I use it so much, but I did want to kind of give folks a crash course, and for those who are in the occasional or I hardly use it category, maybe give you a little bit of reason to maybe kickstart that a little bit, or maybe start to use it a little bit more frequently. There are a couple of other tips I wanted to touch on, and then we can take any questions. Just my reminder to keep it professional. Remember, I know that Anna Sui was on last month and did a great talk on personal brand and establishing some of those pieces. You do want to keep that in mind in terms of their, keep the family stuff in other social media forums. Don't pull that in here. I like to avoid over posting and sharing from my personal account, so I don't sit there and share every 5 minutes kind of thing, but the important pieces, maybe the stuff from the previous day or the stuff that's just come out that morning. I have set a routine, and I vary the content that I post. Some of it's short posts, some of it's longer articles, some of it's links to other websites and articles. And my last tip and recommendation is don't be afraid to change or update, experiment with your profile as you evolve your career in this area. It can be a very powerful tool. As I've evolved mine, I have gotten better and better connection requests and much more relevant connection requests. And I think with that, what I'll do is I want to leave the time, as much time as possible, for any questions. I know we tackled one in the session.
So if anyone has a question for Stephanie, please go ahead and type it into the question box. In the meantime, while we're waiting for questions to come up, Stephanie, I have a question for you on your philosophy for connecting with people that you don't know, or for looking through your profile and like taking people out that you really haven't had much contact with.
Yeah. Admittedly, because I have spent the majority of my career in one industry, I've not necessarily felt the need to do a lot of removal. Now, with that said, I did a small stint for maybe about 6 months where I thought I was going to be really adventuresome and completely change my career, and I went down and tried to be a recruiter, and in a completely different industry. So I went into the food and beverage industry, the hospitality industry. So I ended up adding a whole bunch of connections from that industry, the majority of which I have since removed, just because I decided to go back to what I truly am passionate about, which is human medicines, medical devices, kind of that space, making people's lives better. So I chose to go through and remove those connections. So that's a great trigger for me philosophically, that you maybe want to go through and clean up your connections if you're making that kind of a career change.
Right.
because I tend to like to use the network piece as an online Rolodex, I don't typically remove a lot of people. But like I said, if you're concerned about it getting too big and you want to maintain it, again, you can kind of set a routine. I know some people who once a year sit down and kind of scroll through the list and remove people that maybe they really at this point haven't talked to in 20 years.
Right.
But the funny thing is that sometimes every now and again I get a question from one of those folks that I knew 20 years ago really well. And I'm actually working a current project because of a connection from my very first job. Right, he reached out to me and said, "Hey, are you actually available right now?" Because we were still connected together. So, like I said, my personal philosophy is once you've got them in your network, and especially if you know them really well, I'm a fan of just leaving them in your network.
Right.
The folks that you don't know, if you're, again, for me, I've accepted a couple connection requests from people who said that they wanted to build a relationship and do that networking. So for instance, on open networking, which I think is kind of your other question that you asked, is the philosophy and approach that I use there. I'm relatively open to connection requests. However, I do have a line that continues to get more firm in terms of the type of connection requests that I will typically accept. Being a consultant, I connect with a lot of folks in the industry, so I am super selective about connecting to headhunters and recruiters.
Gotcha.
Once they're connected to you, they can see your connections, and out of my ethics and my perspective, I want to protect my connections' privacy. If they're not actively looking for a job, they don't need to be hounded by these people.
Great.
Yeah.
Question came through, Stephanie,
Yep.
asking, so for those of us who have the premium membership, you can look at who is viewing your profile. And sometimes profiles come through and they say they're in private mode or anonymous. How can we do that? Can we look at someone's profiles in private mode or anonymous mode?
So if somebody has flagged their profile as anonymous, so what they're talking about, for those who don't know, is there's a capability in the premium feature to view who's viewed your profile. And since I'm a premium member, I can show you what that actually looks like. So down here, I have a dashboard that's private to me, and I can actually click this and it'll show me who's actually viewed my profile. And actually, ironically, Wendy is someone that I met because she was actually going after one of her CQE. So she and I had some initial conversations. We never became a connection, but every now and again she pops back into my feed. As a premium member, I can see this level of detail, but if somebody has marked their information, and I was looking to see if maybe somebody has set their security settings so they can browse people privately. And that actually is something that any member can do, is that they can set their profile in their security settings so that their name and title aren't shown in this kind of information. If they've set it to be private, there is no way, unfortunately, for you to actually know who that is. So this someone on LinkedIn, there's no way for me to know who that is. I just know it's somebody on LinkedIn. Sometimes
so you would have to go to your security settings.
Yeah, if you want to change it so that you show up this way,
right.
Then actually what you do is you come into your settings and privacy. So you have a little picture of you and it says me. Click it and it'll actually come into here, and you can actually go into the privacy section, and there are a whole lot of settings in here. And if you're not actively using this, or you're going to start actively using this, I highly recommend you go in here and you review these. And this is something I periodically go through and review, say once a year, just to make sure that the settings are exactly still the way that I want them. Privacy settings are something that all these social media platforms tend to play with a little bit, and sometimes they introduce a new privacy setting that you didn't know was there, and it may be something that you're very interested in using.
Right. Like if you want to play around with your profile, you might want to not share your profile edits.
Correct.
So that people aren't like, what's going on with Marilyn? Why is she changing her profile every day.
Yeah, or she's changed it 6 times in one day. What the heck is she doing?
Right.
And particularly what the person asked about was this profile viewing piece. And each of these options gives you a little bit of description of what it is. And in this case, it's choose whether you're visible, i.e. your informations are going to show, or you're going to view in private mode. As you can see, I have it viewed in private mode. So I will show up. I actually think I've elected, I don't know that I remember. Yeah, so it's basically an anonymous LinkedIn member. So even when you go into private mode, you've got a couple of options that typically appear. You can isolate it just to an organization, which if you're in a large organization is fine sometimes. And in some cases, you absolutely go down the path of just having the anonymous profile.
Got it. That's good.
Yep.
So are there any other values of premium membership that are worth noting?
So there are different levels of memberships, and for those of you who are HD&L members, I covered this in one of the, I think it was in the first newsletter for 2015. I actually walked through each of the premium memberships, and there's actually a great page in the LinkedIn help section that'll actually discuss the various membership levels. And I actually think, I don't know if you can actually get subscriptions. So I can show it to you. I'm not going to actually actively change anything because I like my account, but they have changed this as well. So I'm in what they call a Business Plus. There are several different levels of premium accounts, and what it does is it changes the amount of information that you can see. So as an example of information that I can see that somebody who doesn't have a premium account won't be able to see is if I go to a company site, that information is now flagged as premium. So I can see things like employee counts, distributions, growth, new hires, job postings. I find this kind of information helpful when I'm looking at new clients, especially startup organizations, just because it gives me a little bit more insight into kind of what their employee base kind of looks like and that kind of stuff. For most people, I highly recommend starting with the free account, and when you start running into the walls that say, hey, this feature is really only accessible to a premium member, only then consider going to a premium membership. That's what drove me to my premium membership. I would not go out of the gate and actually get a premium membership out of the box because the majority of the functionality is there and available to you.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you, Brooks. We're about at the end of our hour. Is there anything that you would like to add before we close for the day? You'll have to take yourself off mute to do that. So maybe not. I think Brooks will be sending out a questionnaire to everyone who's registered for this event. It would be really great if you could give us some feedback on the session, and he'll also be sending you a note with your credits. What do they call those again, Stephanie? The
recertification units.
Recertification units. Thank you. So thank you everybody for coming, and Stephanie, thank you so much for a really interesting and informative session. It's quite a useful tool, and you're making it all the more useful for us. So thank you for that.
Well, perfect. Thank you, and I enjoyed it, and I wish everybody a good evening or a good day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.